A princess named Sherazade is married to a tyrannical king, Shahryar. The king executes his wives at dawn after the very first wedding night. He is angry with all the women because his very first love betrayed him. But Sherazade is clever and she has an exceptional gift that will save her life. She tells stories better than anyone. In the evening, she goes to bed with the king and tells him a story, a tale. She never finishes her stories, so she keeps the king in suspense so that he doesn't kill her the next morning because he wants to hear what happens next. After 1001 nights of storytelling, the princess Sherazade wins the king's heart. The king Shahryar overcomes his anger and let her live. This is the background story of the Arabian Nights, a collection of popular tales coming from the so-called Orient. They are also referred to as the 1001 Nights. In this talk, we will travel through the Orient and discover the surprising journey that the tales took before coming to us in Europe in their present form. The reason why I decided to tell you the story and the origins of the Arabian Nights is because the tales, 1001 in number, do not all come from the same place and time. By taking a closer look, we will better understand what this mysterious Orient is made of. As you might already have understood, the Arabian Nights are not only Arabic. They are a mixing of different cultural elements. Some people describe relations within Western societies between people from different countries, cultures, or religions as a clash, a collision. They call it the clash of civilizations. They think that cultures are homogeneous, unchanging. But as we will see through the example of the Arabian Nights, the encounters of cultures also have the capacity of transcending the cultures involved. Thanks to these encounters, a unique product, sometimes surprisingly beautiful and original, is created. It is even perhaps from this collision that the greatest masterpiece originates. Now, let's start by addressing the question: how Arab are the Arabian Nights? The Arabian Nights essentially come from three different sources across time and space. First, an Indo-Persian source dating from the 2nd to the 7th centuries. Then, an Arabic collection coming from Baghdad and dating from the 9th to the 11th century. And thirdly, an Egyptian popular collection of tales dating from the 11th and the 13th centuries. That's it. I've answered the question. Now you know. But don't go. Now we will see what we can do with this information. Perhaps this will surprise you. But the Arabian Nights are almost unknown in the Arab world. And inversely, the most popular tales of the Arab world are almost unknown to us in Europe. As a matter of fact, if you told to a Jordanian, an Algerian, or a Yemeni about Princess Sherazade or the genie of the lamp, chances are he or she has no idea what you're talking about. And inversely, if an Iraqi, a Moroccan, or Assyrian tells you about Andar, the black emblematic hero poet of pre-Islamic Arabia, chances are you've never heard his name before or read something about him. The reason why is simple. The Arabian Nights are first and foremost a European work of literature. It is true to say that the tales do not originally come from Europe, but their huge success is in fact the achievement of a French translator, Antoine Galland, who gathered a manuscript coming from Aleppo, Syria, and dating from the 14th century. He translated it and published it in France in the early 18th century. French high society and the king's relatives discovered this mysterious Orient that made them indulge in fantasy. Palm trees, dancing women, rich sultans, and the idyllic gardens of Mesopotamia or Egypt. It had an overnight success. The tales were translated into many European languages: English, German, Spanish, Danish. This sudden interest in this mysterious Orient has incidentally encouraged the emergence of a new literary and artistic movement known as Orientalism. European painters, writers, and architects were inspired by Oriental cultures and reproduced their themes and patterns. In fact, in the minds of Europeans, the Orient refers to a very wide geographical area, stretching from today's Turkey to India, including the Arabian Peninsula and even sometimes North Africa. As you might expect, this entire region of the world is not inhabited by a single culture, but by many different ones. Now, let's take a closer look at the clues that allow us to suggest that the Arabian Nights are not only Arab. The very first element that let us suggest this is the structure of the story itself. The narrative framework of the Arabian Nights is the story of Sherazade that I told you earlier. This background story binds all 1001 nights together in one book. This stylistic structure comes from India, where it is widely used in literature, mostly in epic literature. The second element concerns the names of some of the most famous characters in the Arabian Nights. Perhaps you've already heard the name Sherazade, Dinazad, Shahriyar, Sinbad. These names come from the Persian language, or Farsi, which is spoken in modern-day Iran. This is no coincidence. If many of the names of the most famous characters in the Arabian Nights come from the Persian language, it is because many of the tales were translated from Persian into Arabic. In fact, a very old collection of tales that bears the name Hezar Afsaneh, literally translated as the 1,000 Tales, has been found. Its author is unknown, but it seems likely that they were inspired by ancient Indian tales. And then, finally, it has been established that some of the most famous tales today of the Arabian Nights were added later and have no authentic Arab textual source. Examples are Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, or Aladdin and the Genie of the Lamp. Mr. Galland had the brilliant idea to include other folk tales and to translate them. If I've mentioned these signs today and emphasized on what is not of Arab origin, it is not to diminish the part of Arab literature. It is to concretely and clearly demonstrate that the encounter of cultures has the capacity to create a unique and timeless masterpiece. Thanks to this encounter, a unique product is created, and it surprises with its beauty and uniqueness. As we've seen, the Arabian Nights mainly come from India and Iran, as well as the Arab world. They were then gathered by a French translator, Antoine Galland, and published in France in the early 18th century. Following a huge success in France, the tales were successively translated into many other languages. Now, each translator is also a writer and has its own way of translating the tales, so that the tales are not the same depending on whether you read them in English or in French. The Arabian Nights have thus become a worldwide piece of literature. To conclude our journey, I would say that literary works are instruments of thought. They are not objects that we borrow, but ideas that we exchange. They travel across time and space. They meet other cultures, other worlds. They sometimes collide because cultures are different, but each one is harmoniously integrated and finally become an original piece of literature, which surprises with its beauty and uniqueness. The reality of a situation is very often more complex than a simple stereotype, a fixed image. It requires an effort of comprehension. But when we finally take a closer look, we better understand the concepts involved, so that at the end of the journey, we better estimate the diversity and the beauty of the world around us. Thank you for your attention.